All right, well, it is 9 o'clock. I still got a few more people trickling in, but we're going to go ahead and get started. I appreciate you guys taking time out of your day to attend our webinar on the S7-1200. We're just going to be reviewing the different hardware options and software capabilities of the basic controller. Just a little bit of background, the 1200 is the successor to the S7-200, which was obsoleted in 2013. It's really the workhorse of the PLC offering, for Siemens. It's an incredibly versatile processor. It's incredibly cost competitive, and it can do a wide variety of applications. So just looking at the family of processors within Siemens, this is our basic controller and comes with a bunch of different options. We also have our 1500 distributed controllers and software controllers for larger applications. Now, when we call this our basic controller, one thing I like to keep in mind is that it's still a very powerful advanced processor. While it's listed as the basic controller, it has the ability to do several different functions, wide variety of applications, tons of stuff integrated, and it's a great fit for a lot of small to medium applications. Looking at the key features of the S7-1200, we do have safety integrated with the 1200, so you can purchase a 1200 safety version. One thing to note with the 1200 safety processor is that the onboard I/O is not safety I/O. It makes getting the safety processor makes the processor safety capable. You can add safety I/O to it, and you can connect it to other safety devices via Ethernet, but the I/O itself on the base unit does not change. Security integrated. There's a lot of different features, especially with version 16, that allow for different security options. As of version 16, you can now send emails utilizing certificate authentication on Gmail or utilizing SMTP relays. You can add firewalls with VPN connectivity to the 1200. There's tons of different options there, and we'll get into more detail on that. Integrated diagnostics is a pretty... Hold on 1 minute. Integrated diagnostics is a pretty important feature when it comes to programming with the inside of TIA Portal. With a lot of other manufacturers, you actually have to go in and find all of your diagnostics for your different I/O cards, for your processor, and actually manually program alarms. But with Siemens, with the 1200 and with a basic panel, literally you can check a box and get all kinds of integrated diagnostics on the I/O, on communication, hardware, and it's all just checking a box. Big feature is the fact that it is also engineered with the TIA Portal. And I say also because a lot of other manufacturers split up their small PLCs and large PLCs with different softwares. You can take a 1200 application, copy the blocks out of it, copy them into a 1500 processor within TIA Portal, and grow your application from a small processor to a large processor with just a few copy and paste. The design is really, it's compact, it's flexible. There's a lot of different options in terms of different I/O card types, whether you're going to use an I/O board or an I/O card. You can move the I/O rack onto a different row if you don't have enough room. So it's a pretty flexible options in terms of the different things that you can do. And then different technology options, built-in PID. Our PID does have the ability to do auto tuning, motion, VFD control, RFID. All of those are options with the 1200 processor. So this is just showing the 1200, and one of the most important things I like to show in this graph is you can see that the 1200 starts to overlap with the distributed controller. And the reason why I think that's an important thing to show that difference is that the 1200, unlike other options in this family, does not limit you from connecting remote I/O to it. So you can take another 1200 and control it with a 1200 utilizing what Siemens calls iDevice, or you can take E2200SP remote I/O, which is just a remote I/O rack, and connect it to a 1200. So you can get into distributed control options with a basic controller. I would say that the limiting factor with a 1200 is going to be memory, and we'll talk about memory in a little bit when we get to a slide that kind of shows the technical specifications of the different options. This is just a few different market segments that the 1200 really excels in. OEM applications are fantastic for the 1200. There's a lot of different options for downloading the program to the processor. So, you know, especially if you're looking at serial machine design, it's a flexible option to be able to download the program to the processor. Because you have the SD card. The SD card, you can load the processor and do a transfer from the SD card to the processor. So you can now have people that are building machines out on the production floor that don't have a laptop, don't have programming experience, that can now update the program on the PLC itself without needing, you know, any of that equipment. Remote communications, like I said, you can do VPNs, you can do cellular connectivity built in with communication cards on the processor. Motion control, I would be careful to say that it's fairly basic. You know, you're not going to want to control a 4 or 5 axis, you know, system with a 1200. And infrastructure is a huge section for 1200s. They're used a lot in different in building technology, HVAC control, especially because of their cost point, their price point, and the ability to do distributed control with a single processor and have remote I/O or serial communications to different types of building infrastructure. So just showing the licensing. So we use SIMATIC Step 7 Basic to program 1200s. And so the nice thing about that is it allows you to get into TIA Portal at a much lower price point than going with Step 7 Professional. So it's incredibly powerful. The Step 7 Basic doesn't limit you from a programming language standpoint. You can program in structured text, statement list, ladder, free body diagram. And then an important thing to note is that Step 7 Basic does include WinCC Basic. So if you want to program a basic panel, you don't need to purchase an additional license to be able to program the HMIs. Safety Basic is an adder to Step 7 Basic. So if you want to be able to program the safety processors, you are going to need an additional license for that. And then Step 7 Professional, if you do have it, licenses you for the basic as well. We were just talking earlier about the SD card. This is basically the layout of the processor. Some really nice features are removable terminal blocks. If you do need to replace a PLC out in the field, you can remove the terminal blocks, pull the processor out, clip the terminal blocks back in without having to rewire. The SD card can be used for several different things. You can use the SD card for a firmware upgrade to transfer a program to a PLC or to be the program card for the PLC living in the processor. And program card benefits are that if you leave a program card in the processor and you need to replace the processor down the line, you can take the processor out, replace it with a new processor, stick the SD card in, and then the processor will keep running with the previous program. And then you've got an expansion board slot here, and that can be used for a lot of different things. We have analog cards, digital cards, serial communication cards, or even an extended battery to extend the retentive memory length of the processor. Showing the different options in the family of 1200s. Each one has different options. You'll notice you see the DC underneath each processor. The first option is the power supply type. The second slash is the input types, and the third slash is the output types. So we have DC and AC powered processors. All of them have DC inputs, and then we have DC transistor outputs or relay outputs. The relay outputs can switch up to 230 volts. The AC is 120 to 230, and every processor has the option for a DC power supply built in. So AC power in, half amp of DC power out to use for the DC inputs. And the safety options are only available in the DC powered options from 1212 to 1215. So just showing size, we've got three different form factors. The 1211 and the 1212 are the same size, and the 1214 and the 1215 are the larger size. Now the 1215 includes analog inputs and outputs, and then the 1217 includes more digital inputs. We can see that here in more detail on the next page, where you can see that as you start with the 1211, you've got 6 digital inputs, 4 digital outputs. 1212, 8 DI, 6 DO, and then 1214, we start to get into, you get the 2 outputs with the 1215, and then as you move up to the 1217, you get a few different options in terms of the amount of counters, the amount of digital analog. Now, the one thing that I think is core to mention here is you'll see work memory versus an internal load memory. So the work memory is the amount of space that you have for compiled code in your processor. Now, they did make the safety processor have more memory to fit the safety code. However, in the base processor, I'd mentioned earlier that as your application grows, one of the limiting factors is going to be memory. These might look like low numbers. You can fit a lot of code on these processors. However, I have seen a few applications where people try to fit much more code than the processor is designed for, and you will reach a limit, and there is no expanding the work memory. The work memory is set in the hardware, and your program does have to compile and fit in that space. So just something to keep in mind as you're looking at different applications and evaluating a 1200 for your solution. That work memory is something to keep in mind. Looking at execution time, these are fairly fast processors, and for most applications, they're going to do pretty good. You do want to keep an eye on the processor as you start looking at distributed control, motion control. It's not uncommon if you put a very large application into 1200 with a lot of distributed I/O, several different Ethernet VFDs, remote I/O racks. You can start seeing, depending on the code, you can start to see scan times grow into the high, 60s, 70s, even above 100 milliseconds. And so just depending on your application, that may or may not be acceptable. And so that's something to keep in mind. The other thing that's important to keep in mind when designing an application with a 1200 is that the 1200 does let you use structured text or structured control language, as Siemens calls it. And it's pretty easy to get long scan times if you're using for loops and while loops, which is something that the processor does let you do. And it can be useful for certain situations, but also have to be careful with that. Another thing to note here is the real-time clock buffering, which is listed at 20 days typical. However, I have had customers have it run much longer than that. That's just a conservative number that's listed by Siemens. So looking at the different rack configurations that you can build, as you get more bigger processors, you have more space that you can add to the processor. So looking at this, the 1211, you can't actually add any I/O modules to it. The 1212, you can only add 2, and the 1214 through 1217, you can add 8. All processors let you put up to 3 communication modules on them, and all the processors have an option for 1 board in the processor itself. The important thing to note here is that we do have a wide variety of signal modules. So even with a 1212, you can only do 2 options. However, we have 16 input, 16 output hybrid signal modules. So you can add 32 inputs and 32 outputs to a 1212 processor and still have 3 communication modules and also add remote I/O to it. So again, basic processor, but you can do some fairly complicated applications with it. Our signal boards offer digital inputs, digital outputs, analog inputs, thermocouple inputs, analog outputs. One thing to note is with the analogs, it's all 1. So if you add a signal module to the base of the PLC, you get 1 analog input or 1 analog output. And then with the analogs, we've got tons, 4 inputs, 8 inputs, combo cards, 4 in, 2 out. And then technology modules, we have different options: energy meters, condition monitoring, weighing modules, RFID modules. With the communication, we also have a wide array of options. We can do cellular cards, we can do serial communication, OSI interface, we can do IO link, Profibus, and then we also have an option to put a serial communication board in the base of the PLC. Now that is for Modbus and USS. It's a great little tool. While Modbus isn't a built-in application or a built-in communication protocol for Siemens, it's pretty easy to get programmed. So if anybody is curious about that or has any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to your Heitek salesperson, and I'd be happy to provide code examples or support in any way if you're looking to get that done. And then probably one of the most important things is that, so we have a built-in Ethernet port. So you don't need a communication module for just standard Ethernet communication, Profinet, Modbus TCP. And then as of version 16 with the latest firmware, we can now do OPC UA built into the processor. And that is a huge tool for us. That's been incredibly popular. And it allows you now to take a 1200 and integrate it into a larger SCADA system without having to, have an OPC driver on the SCADA system itself. This is just reviewing those different options that we had talked about. One thing I didn't mention on the previous slide is MQTT. That's a pretty popular IoT protocol. I have a few customers that have utilized MQTT to push data into AWS or Azure and create custom web pages with a 1200. And so now we're talking both control and data logging from these processors. And again, this is all done with 1212s, 1214s. So basic low cost processor for an OEM with tons of IoT support options. And, now you have customers that can take your 1200 and control it from a website. Some of the different accessories we offered, I had talked about the expansion cable, which allows you to continue a row of I/O cards on a different row in your panel. We do have several different memory card options in terms of sizes. One thing I would like to mention with the memory card is you do need to use a Siemens memory card. They are designed for much higher read-write cycles than the standard memory card, which you would purchase. If you use a standard memory card, it will fail quickly. And the different size options, if you're looking at just a program, 412, you're probably going to be okay with. If you're looking to do something like log data logs, trace functions, things like that written to the memory card, you're going to want to start looking at a larger memory card to store that data. We do have simulator boards to simulate digital inputs. Those use the internal DC power supply to simulate inputs into the processor. If you buy a 1200 starter kit, you will get a simulator board with the starter kit. And then we have a couple different options of the compact switch modules and power modules. These are nothing more than Ethernet switches and power supplies in a 1200 form factor. So just a cool tool if you're, building an OEM package and you're looking for, a consistent look with the components. It does make for a pretty nice panel when you use a compact switch module, power module, PLC, and all of that, has that same look and feel as the 1200 itself. We had talked about security integrated earlier. Some of the other options that you can do with the security integrated are know-how protection, which allows you to take, say, a proprietary control block that you yourself had written, that's your company's intellectual property, and you can then know-how protect that block. So let's say you have a control block that controls some sequencing for a piece of equipment that you have that is intellectual property that you don't want your customer to know, but you would like your customer to be able to go in there and say, configure the timing for the input conveyor to said device. You can know-how protect just a single control block inside your program so that your customer can't actually go in and see that, but they can go in and say, adjust the timing on the conveyors. With copy and execution protection, you can keep your customer from copying the program off of the SD card of the processor, and then say put that SD card into a different processor. So let's say they wanted to copy your machine, build a whole machine exactly the same as yours, take the SD card out, copy it, put it in. It wouldn't run because of copy and execution protection. Access protection lets you lock down the processor itself. This has gotten much more robust than it used to be. There's always been certain people and with other manufacturers, there's been in certain cases, ways to get around processors or passwords. If you set a password on a Siemens project or a Siemens processor and you forget it, there is nothing that Siemens support can do to help you. You will need to factory reset the processor and start from scratch. So just know that. And then, we get into certificate authentication, secure communications. There's a lot of options, especially with the latest firmware of the processor. So keep that in mind as you're evaluating different options. That security is paramount these days. And just know that we've got a lot of options to secure both your company's intellectual property and your company's equipment. Integrated PID. this is one of my favorite processors to do PID on. We have a built-in technology object to do PID. It walks you through the inputs and outputs. It lets you pick the different things that you're controlling, whether you're controlling flow, pressure, heat, and it has a fantastic commissioning interface where it tracks your input, your output, and your set point, and you can actually watch the system. Tune inside of this commissioning interface. And you do have the ability to take that entire commissioning interface and build it into an HMI so that your customer themselves can tune on the HMI. Just really powerful tool for PID control. And then integrated motion control, like I said, it's pretty basic. We can do position, we can do speed control, we can do some basic multi-axis, 1-2 axis with servo control, but it's not going to be quite as accurate as if you're using a 1500 system, mostly because the 1200 doesn't quite have the speed, the communication speed that the 1500 does. And then you can also do stepper motor control with pulse train outputs. You do have to get the DC output version of the PLC in order to use pulse train outputs, however. And then Profinet, we can do Profinet control of a drive built into the processor. The different options that we do have for the diagnostics, you can turn on a web server on the PLC and be able to view the diagnostics on the web server itself. You can turn on an option on the HMI and view the diagnostics of the processor from the HMI. And all of the texts are built in and already written. It's clear text information. You can do different things like let's say you have an analog input run high. It'll actually tell you that the analog input run high. It'll tell you where the analog input run high, and it'll also tell you possible things that you can do to fix it. And all of this is checkbox. You do not have to write any of these messages, any of these diagnostics. Safety integrated options are we have them in three different processor options. ProfiSafe does let you do safety to a drive, safety to different I/O devices. Let's say if you had, say, a ProfiSafe laser scanner, and then if you want to do I/O, we have different options for safety inputs and safety outputs. The one thing I would say that's really kind of, I think, sets Siemens apart from the safety, in safety in particular, is the fact that Siemens processors, or Siemens software, I should say, treats safety. It allows you to do safety in the same environment that you do regular programming in. So, if you open up TIA Portal and you're working with a safety processor, you'll have your safety settings and you'll have your safety function blocks in the same project area where you have all your other standard code. And you can lock down the safety code separate from the standard code so that you can modify the standard code without giving your customer access to the safety code. But it's not like you have your safety software side and your regular software side. And that's one of the things I really like about Siemens and the way they treat safety, because it allows you the ability to have everything in one interface. And we do, if it's programmed correctly and it's, properly audited, we do allow you to get up to SIL 3 PLE with our safety processors. But the most important thing of that is that it is audited and designed correctly. Just getting the safety processor itself does not make the system safe. If anyone is interested in getting a 1200, I highly, highly recommend looking at our 1200 starter kits. Please reach out to your salesperson at Heitek. Our 1200 starter kits are a great way to get software at a low cost price and essentially get a perpetual license of TIA Portal, whatever current version is out at the time you buy the starter kit, which allows you to program both the PLCs and the basic panels for essentially free, because the cost of the starter kit is essentially the cost of the hardware, and you get the software with the starter kit. So I really implore, if anybody's interested, if anybody is thinking about, getting started with Siemens 1200s, the starter kit is the best way to do it. And if anybody has any questions, please reach out to your sales representative. Please reach out to or have your sales representative get you in touch with me, and I'd be happy to discuss your application and discuss the different options that we have available for you. If anybody has further questions, would like more information, don't hesitate to reach out. But I do appreciate you taking time out of your day to watch this presentation. I hope you learned a little bit more about Siemens hardware today. And if anybody, if there's any questions in the Q&A, please don't hesitate to ask them within the webinar. Post your question there, and I'll answer it. I'll be sticking around for another 10-15 to answer questions. And thank you for taking the time. Have a wonderful day.